with that. Welcome everyone. Can everyone hear me just first of all? Everyone hear me fine? Great, okay. So as very kindly pointed out, I am a part-time PhD student at the Highet. I'm coming to the end of my first year. I'm also a teacher, and I have done my master's at a French university, and people who aren't familiar with the French master's system, that requires doing 2 dissertations, because it's a 2-year course. So I've done 2 dissertations, and I'm now doing my PhD, so I feel like I have been, well, I feel like I'm in a good position to be telling people how to get the ball rolling and how to start. I think, excuse me, it is possibly the most difficult step, is just figuring out what to even do at the beginning. Because once you've figured that out, you can kind of run with it and you can go off in that direction and work out where you're going to go. The good news is there is so much help out there. At the end of this presentation, I've got a slide with quite a few useful resource links. But just generally, there's a lot of presentations online, and aside from that, whatever I say to you today will also be helpful. This is not tailored to any particular department or any particular style of dissertation necessarily. It's meant as general advice to help you adapt it to whatever you need and make sure that you can come up with some ideas. So these are the aims of today's session. I hope to offer practical advice based on real-life examples. That means I'm going to be using specific examples, mainly from my PhD research projects, because it's really fresh in my mind. So it's a bigger project, but the concept is essentially the same, definitely at least at this stage. So we're going to look at how to choose a topic, or at least give you some ideas, and then how to narrow that down into a research question, which I think is a really difficult stage. Then we're going to look at mind mapping, and finally, just at the end, a few minutes on time management. Just before we start, as was pointed out, this is the website address. So you can use this the whole way through the presentation to ask questions. If you'd rather just ask them via the app, then raise your hand, that's completely fine. I would say, just so that we stick to the time limits, if you can submit your questions throughout the presentation, but if you have a question that you want to kind of raise your hand and ask, if you can leave that until the end, just so that we can get them all done together. And hopefully I'll have already answered it by the time we get to the end of the presentation. Right, thank you. The code is not capital, so the code is in small letters, just to let everyone know. Thanks for now. So there's going to be, this is going to be like a semi-interactive session. I have a few things that I would like you to try and do yourselves. I'm not going to force anyone to present, so don't worry. But we have this tool that we can use so that you can give your responses back, because I think it's really good to get an idea of how to do something by actually trying it. So let's start right at the beginning. Where do I begin? How do I choose a topic? As I said before, this can be the biggest obstacle because it can appear like there's just either so much to choose from or just no clue of where to even start. There's a few kind of general guidelines that you probably just have to follow before you think about picking a topic. The first one, read the guidelines and then read them again, and then read them again if you're not sure. Your own individual departments will have these resources which you should have received by now. If in doubt, contact whoever is the person who's supposed to speak to in your department. But this is the information which contains the essential things that you need to know, such as when is my dissertation due? Do you need to write a proposal for your dissertation? How many words, how many pages? Or are there any expected components? And that can vary very much depending on what department you're in, depending on what research field you're in. So you need to make sure that you are really, really clued up with all of these things. And just to note, I think the slides are going to be made available afterwards if you don't get a chance to write things down. So once you've figured out the really essential information, these are some of the questions I think can be really useful when you're thinking about which direction you want to take your research in. The first one seems obvious, but it is so important. What do you actually care about? Why did you do this master's in the first place? What is it that really made you excited to start this course? Have you done a particular class this year that you just kind of sat there and thought, yes, this is exactly what I care about? Also think about your future interests. I'll get to that in a couple of slides. The second one, sustainability. What I mean by this is it a fleeting interest? Is it something you read on a whim, and if your 3 article journals, whatever, down the line, you're going to be bored of the topic? So think about something that is going to sustain your interest. I'm not saying that you're going to like jump out of bed every morning thinking, yes, I get to read more articles today. It's never going to be the case. But it should be something that you're at least interested in, like you're excited to take the project forward. And finally, is it interesting to others? Doesn't mean like your family or friends or whatever, you don't have to care that they don't care about the subject. But people in your field, your supervisor, your peers, is it going to make a contribution? Is it going to be something that people would be potentially interested in reading? The next piece of advice would be to check out what has already been done. Existing literature, if you've got a vague idea, find out who the key writers are, find out what the key concepts are, have a read around, see what the current modern debates are going on around that subject. The second one, past students. So I've got the link for the IOE Dissertation's website at the end of this presentation. I really cannot stress how helpful it can be to read other people's projects. Obviously not to then copy what they have done. But it can be really, really helpful just to see how somebody's justified their ideas. What sort of methods was somebody using in your area? Sometimes even the bibliography can be a great place for you to start and realise, who have they been reading? Who should I be reading these people to? And your peers, the people in this room today, people who you're on your course with. It's a really underestimated resource, I think. I did my master's by distance learning, and it wasn't until the end of my second year, once I kind of sort of acquired a base of contacts, I was able to talk to other people about what I was doing. And I didn't have that opportunity in the first year. And it was so beneficial in the second year, just to say to someone, hey, I'm thinking of perhaps looking at this, what do you think? It can just be a really good idea, like using somebody as a soundboard, basically. Some more questions to bear in mind. Is it feasible? You don't have a huge amount of time to do this. You've got to bear in mind that it isn't just the data collection. Things like managing your bibliographies, researching the literature, they can take a really, really big amount of time sometimes, so make sure that you factor all of these things in. The second would be logistics. If you are wanting to do interviews with school children, for example, can you get the access to those people? Are people going to email you back in time? I think it's quite easy sometimes to get so sidetracked with your research that you forget about the everyday life of people. I have waited months and months at the moment to get the research approval that I've been waiting for from my participant school in India. And they've got things to get on with. I'm not their first priority, of course not. So just bear in mind things like that. Can you actually get access to the things that you want to? The third is skill sets. In my master's, my second year, I did a mixed methods approach, whereas I'd only done qualitative research for the first one. And handling statistic data was something I hadn't really done before, and it took me a really long time to get my head around it, and even just to get my head around the software. So if you're going to have to be using a certain type of software, perhaps, consider that it may take you a while to get used to knowing how to use it. And what is the relevance? So I briefly touched upon this before. Obviously, is it relevant to your course? Is it something that your supervisor is going to accept? But also, is it relevant to you? Think back to why you chose to do this master's. What were you hoping it would lead to for you? If you are hoping to do something, if you want to do a PhD afterwards, or if this was something that's going to help you in your career, can you do a research project that's going to boost that even further? Can you make it related to something that would be in your favour when it comes to applying for a job or applying for a PhD? So, the next thing I want to talk about with you is using a mind map. I don't know how familiar people are with mind maps. I learned about mind maps when I was revising for my GCSEs when I was 15, and somebody lent me a VHS tape on how to mind map. And I've used it ever since. I really have. This is just an example. Mind map that I used when I was initially planning this session. I'll take you through just briefly how to approach a mind map. This is a really good resource for using a mind map online. It's called Coggle. You get a certain amount of free ones and then you can upgrade. you can actually have unlimited free ones if you allow them to be public. But the basic concept is you start with a main idea. So if you're at the beginning of your dissertation right now and you're not sure where to start, you've got a few ideas, you're not really sure which one's going to lead anywhere, you can put your basic idea in right in the middle, and that can be as wide as education to something smaller as a particular policy that was implemented last year. Leading off from the main idea, you're going to branch with all of these subtopics. So anything you can think of. Now what I think is great about mind maps is there's not really any specific structure to it aside from either middle branches leading off. It can be as flexible as you want it to be, and it really should be flexible. You don't need to worry about, oh, this line's longer than this one only has 3 subsections, this one has 4. You should just use it as a resource to get all of your ideas down on paper. So once you've kind of got your main idea, you've branched off from the subtopics, you can take each subtopic further and start looking at where maybe they branch off into. And this is where you can start thinking of potential authors or potential concepts that relate to a bigger idea. And you're eventually just going to get smaller and smaller until you've mapped out all of the ideas you have. And then, for me, what's the most useful part of mind maps is, and this tool allows you to do it, you can do this by hand as well if you prefer. You can link topics, so you can make connections. If you see that something over there has a really strong link to something you said here, you can match it up and you can put comments on links. And I think this part of the mind mapping is so important because I think that's when you find your research question, and that's when you find your area. You've got this which has already been done, or this which has already been done, and you putting them together often can be the way to generate an idea for your research. So what I thought we would do now is we'll look at why they're helpful, and then I thought we can make a mind map together. So the reason why mind mapping can be so helpful, first of all, is it helps you visualize your ideas. So rather than just having kind of notes written kind of haphazardly in various different textbooks, you have it right there on one page. And you can keep adding to it. And you come back to it the next day after you've had an idea and you just branch it off to wherever it relates to. When you're then looking back at it, it's really easy to recall your thought processes because you can see what links to what and how did that spark an idea which led to this branch. It helps you see the connections, which I already mentioned. Also identify gaps. So if you've got a general idea, you've got these 4 branches coming off from it, and 3 of the branches have got loads and loads of detail because it's an area that you're familiar with, you can identify that big hole in the middle where you think, either this is a great research question because it's understudied, or you don't know too much about it, or I need to get reading because I don't know anything about this research area. Either way, it's helpful. It helps you identify keywords. You'll be writing a lot, talking about a lot of different themes. You might have certain themes that keep coming back up. Keywords are really important when it comes to your literature searching, because then it's going to help you narrow down how to find the information you need from the masses of literature. And it makes it manageable. It just looks, I think, just visually helps you compartmentalize everything. So rather than it being this huge project, it's broken down into these smaller subsections that you can think, right, I need to concentrate on this, or I need to write something about this. And you could do mind maps at the beginning stage when it's very broad and you're identifying something at a very large scale, or you can zoom it right in and it can be for a particular chapter. So you've got your particular chapter idea and then all of the different things that you want to cover in that chapter coming off. And you might have sub-branches with particular authors or even quotes. So I thought we could have a look at a real live action mind map. So the one that I've come up with, I picked English language teaching mainly because I think it's something that everyone is at least vaguely familiar with. It's not too general. So if this is, for example, your research area, which just by chance it happens to be mine, you're going to start off with your original idea, and that's going to branch out into various different concepts. So for example, we might have here types of teaching, which I can then branch out further What do I mean by types of teaching? Perhaps English, sorry? Learning styles, that's another one, yep. Learning styles we'll put up here. Anybody else want to suggest things? Teaching strategies. Sorry if I spelled things wrong. Assessment. Oh, what did I just say? There's several others that we could look at. I mean, I've written a few down. Policy. Multilingualism. Any other ideas? Anything else we could add to this?
Materials.
Materials. Yep. I've not thought of that one. Materials.
Age.
Age. Yeah. So like the levels. Yeah. Levels / age. Probably linked with that. I suppose I'd put that types of teaching. If I branch that one on. Oh gosh, that's not what I want to do.
Curriculum.
Curriculum, yeah, great one. So, I mean, just from not even 2 minutes, about 30 seconds of us looking at that, there's already all of these different areas that are branching out from that. I mean, fair enough, English language teaching is a huge subject anyway, but just sitting down and looking at a main idea on a piece of paper can be really, really helpful. And then you take it further, so you've got types of teaching. What I was thinking by that was English as a first language, which bounces other ideas of English as a second language. I'm just going to put second. English for academic purposes. If we take it to policy, are we talking about UK policy? Are we talking about international? If so, where? Are we talking about school level policy? Take another one. Assessment. Yeah, formative. I'll just put formative in and put etc. because I'm a very slow typer. Formative, etc. Perhaps international English language exams such as IELTS or TOEFL or the other ones, etc. etc. You can see how this kind of develops. That took me about a minute with your help. You can sit and do that take 20 minutes, take half an hour, map out all of the things that you could possibly do. And then you start again. Say you, for example, you decide to do your research on a specific policy related to English in a specific context, then that's going to become the middle of your mind map. And then you're going to branch out again. And here, say for example, we're going to look at English for academic purposes. I'm going to drag it to create a link because that links with IELTS. It's quite pretty as well, it's quite satisfying to use. So I won't take that any further, you get the idea of how it works. Even if you're a bit sceptical about it, you think, probably not going to work that much for me, try it out. Just 20 minutes, even if you're just on the bus on the way home, you've got nothing else to do, try it out and just see how easy it is for ideas to run. And sometimes you'll start and then one branch just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you realise that's your area of interest really. That's where you've got the most knowledge and interest. So there's our mind map, well done. Let's go back to, this is the mind map that I made earlier this year when I was refining my research question. It probably won't make sense to anybody else, and that doesn't really matter. Nobody's going to be seeing this. I've got a huge chunk of quote up there that I put in one because I really didn't want to forget to use that quote to connect these two ideas. So you can use it however you want. You can make the connections. I go back to this sometimes. I delete things that are no longer relevant, or I make a new one and delete because I quite like to keep them to see the progression. I add in branches. It's front grown. So, if you have any questions about mind maps, please feel free to submit them on the Slido. Slido, is that what it is? Yeah, Slido. Otherwise, I'll make an attempt to answer them at the end. We'll look now at framing the question, which I think can be a very intimidating part of the research. A few things to think about when you've got your idea, you've got your general direction, you're now trying to formulate it into a workable research question. Think about dissertations you have read, because you will have read some by that point. How were their questions framed? Look at how people are putting into words their research ideas. Consider the aims, the context, and methods of your proposed research. Does your research question address these clearly? If in doubt, speak to your supervisor or speak to somebody in the department you feel comfortable speaking to. Take on board their suggestions and be open to revision. So it's very much a part of this process of becoming a researcher. You can submit something that you think is absolutely fantastic and you don't get great feedback on it, and it can be disheartening. But it's really, really important to take on board the advice that you are given. If they're saying this question isn't working, we'll think about how. Are you too vague? Are you too kind of non-specific? And another thing to note as well is your research question can and will change. So it's probably changes a bit less often in a master's project just because it's the time frame is a lot smaller. But I think I'm on my 4th research question at the moment, and I started in October. So one of those was completely unrelated. I switched topics after 2 months. But I'm constantly reworking it, and I'm going to show you my questions today. And if you have any advice on how I can make it better, I would be very grateful. So, a good research question. What is a good research question? It is specific. So when I'm saying it's specific, it should be clear and simple. It's not the time for flowery language in a research question. It needs to be specific, but it shouldn't be yes or no. It should definitely be an open-ended question. If you can answer your research with yes or no, there's not really much point in doing it. It needs to be focused, so it shouldn't be too broad. Essentially, you need to make it clear to your reader what you are studying, who you are studying, where you're studying it, who, what, where, when, if that's relevant. If it's taken from if you're looking at policy, for example, from the 1950s, that needs to be there in your research question. All of these factors needs to be there, not only because it makes it easier for your reader and ultimately your examiner to understand where you're coming from, but it's essential for you and for your development and to make sure that you remain on track with your question. Is it answerable? Can this actually be answered? Is something to bear in mind? And is it manageable? Again, that links back to the time. Can you do this over the next few months? And as always, it should be in line with the expectations of your individual department. So, these are some research questions that I have given as an example. They're based on my own research question. All of these are not particularly successful research questions. So, what I would like you to do now is take a couple of minutes, just to the people on your table, the people around you. I would like you to discuss why you think, or what do you think about these research questions. And you can submit your answers via Slido. Okay? 2 or 3 minutes, is that fine for everyone? Okay, let's stop it there. Just because we don't have a lot of time. You can submit your answers through Slido. Has everybody submitted their answers? If each group could perhaps make a couple of comments and submit it now on Slido, and I'll open up the app. Oh.
Yeah, it's www.sli.e. And when you access the website, the event help is UCL. So the website is www.sli.do, and when you enter the website, you just enter the event code with UCL, and you can post whatever. Yes.
I mean, feel free to send all the criticism that you have about these questions. Okay, the third is actually 2 questions. Yes, it's 2 research topics. You can't possibly answer both of those in a master's. Number 1 is too vague. Yes, precisely. There's no mention of who the students are or where you're doing the practice. Are you looking at every student in the entire world, ever? Yes, too general. I think people are picking up on the right things. Not specific, too wide. In terms of the type of background, yes, exactly. So that's another key point here. If you look at the question, it's general because you're not telling us which students you're looking at all, but also because what do you mean by background? You have to be specific when you're talking about, with your word choice, basically. Make sure you can justify every word in your title. If we go back and have a look at a few more. Too general, yeah, the answer for the second one can be yes or no. It might have a good idea behind it, but you need to frame it in a way that isn't just yes or no. Good, okay, everybody seems to have picked up on why all of those questions were not particularly successful research questions. Now, what I hope will be considered as a successful research question is my own research question, which I am still working on, and it is very likely to change. But what I hope is coming across clearly in this question is where I am doing the study. When I'm talking about backgrounds, what backgrounds do I mean? And perhaps students, perhaps I could work on that and be a bit more specific. I plan to when I have actually decided which students will be part of my research. But do you see how it's the same idea? All of those research questions were exactly the same idea. But by choosing your words carefully and making sure you're giving detail, you make it into what looks more like a workable research question. The backgrounds, here I've got the diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, so it's been given extra information, but it is also a very difficult term to use. I'm going to have to really justify that in my work. I'm going to have to say what I mean by socioeconomic background and how I'm defining it, because it's pretty much impossible to define. Okay, good. So, another interactive session, task for you. I thought I would like you to come up with your own research question, just so that you're not only looking at what makes a good one, but you're formulating a good one. So I've come up with this idea, which I think is pretty accessible to everyone. How do apps help students learn languages? It's not a bad idea for a research project at all. It could be really interesting, but it's not a research question right now, because mainly it's missing most of these questions. What, I suppose, is kind of there to help students learn, but what do you mean by learn, and how are you going to quantify that learning, and learning what exactly? The whole language, a certain part of it? Who? There's no clue there to who we're looking at. When comes in if it's kind of necessary, if you're looking at historical things. It may be something you want to include. And where? So is this taking place in a particular context? Well, it will always be in a particular context. It's going to be a comparative study. So I would like you to have a think about that now, okay, in your groups. Take a couple of minutes and see what you can come up with. You are free to imagine all of the details. So pick your students, pick the language, pick the type of learning that you want your students to, you want to be testing for. Yeah, a couple of minutes. And then please post your responses on Slido. Okay, if you're still submitting, that's fine. Just kind of keep submitting as I'm talking. Some of these are, yeah, brilliant. This is exactly it. How do audio apps help sixth form students learn Spanish in a classroom setting? Great. Perhaps which particular school you might add, or in a particular area. Is it you're doing it in London, are you doing it in Manchester, are you doing it in Portugal, somewhere, wherever, something like that. But other than that, great. How do students question the legitimacy of translation on digital dictionary apps? Great, I really love that lateral thinking. I was not expecting a question like that. Fantastic. Again, you might want to put in what type of students. Are you talking about university level students? I'm guessing probably not nursery level if we're talking about questioning the legitimacy of translation. But you never know. What types of applications can assist primary school students acquire a second language in public school classrooms in Asia? Great, sounds like it might be a comparative study. You might want to narrow Asia down a bit. But generally, definitely the right sort of questions that we need to be looking at. How effective are popular English vocabulary apps to elementary age English students in India? Yeah, again, we're getting a lot of the key information. How does Facebook help teenagers learn grammar? Interesting one. You might want to specify. It'd be an interesting one to figure out how you would go about testing that. There we go. There's a research project for somebody in the class. Great. These are all really fantastic. How do language game apps help Key Stage 3 students to learn foreign languages at home? Really specific. But in a good way. That's exactly how specific you need to be. Okay, so that took you about 2 minutes. If you spend a couple of days thinking about your research question, or if you're constantly thinking about how to improve your research question, you're going to come up with something really fantastic. But I hope that was helpful, at least in thinking about what sort of information is helpful to include in a research question. So, for the final section of today's session, I wanted to talk a bit about planning. So, I don't know if we have any other teachers in the room, but as a teacher, I've had backward planning drilled into me for the last 4 years. So, for anyone who's not familiar with what backward planning is, it pretty much does what it says on the tin. You pick your final destination, or your final point, your final deadline, and you figure out what needs to be done by that day. And then you work backwards from that. So rather than thinking, this week I'm going to do this, next week I'm going to do that, flip it and work backwards. If you know that this is due on the 7th of September, and you think you're probably going to need a week or whatever to proofread it, or to edit, or to do things like tidy up the bibliography, put it all into one document, compile it, the things that take a little bit longer than you always think they will. How long is that going to take? Okay, now what's next? How long is my data collection going to take? So that it brings you back to today. If you get to today and you realise that you've not got as much time as you thought you did, you're going to have to kind of chop a bit of time off from other places. But it's better to work backwards rather than get to the 5th of September and realise you haven't written your 3rd chapter yet and it's due 2 days later. The second one, break it down. So this is why mind maps I think are really helpful for breaking things down. We break it down in 2 ways. One, when it comes to organising your planning, it can be quite overwhelming to say, right, next week we're going to write chapter 3. It's a huge, huge thing. Why not do it Monday? I'm going to write the introductory paragraph of the 1st section. Or however you break it down, on Monday morning I'm going to write that introductory paragraph. It's just so much more accessible. Rather than thinking I've got this huge thing I've got to do and now I really don't want to do it because it seems like too much work. If I give myself a small task, I'm much more likely to think I can do this and I'll get it done. The second one is the Pomodoro technique. I don't know if anybody's aware of this. I use it all the time to do absolutely everything. I use it to do this presentation. When you've got something which takes a long time or is going to take up a lot of mental effort and energy, you can be sometimes a bit reluctant to start it, or you can get that kind of overwhelming fear of panic of, I don't even know where to begin. The way I kind of manage that is, the Pomodoro technique is based on, you use tomatoes that you use as kitchen timers. You must have seen the tomato kitchen timer. It's based on that, and the guy who invented it, his name escapes me right now. It's based on the fact that you work for 25 minutes, absolute, pure, uninterrupted, focused work. But it's 25 minutes. Everyone can sit down and concentrate. It means no Facebook, no WhatsApp, nothing. Just work for 25 minutes. Once the timer goes off, after 25 minutes, you give yourself a mandatory 3 to 5 minute break. Get up, walk around the room, check Facebook, reply to that email if you have to, but I would recommend doing something that isn't just staring at the screen. Get up, walk around, do something, then you get back for 25 minutes. Every time you've completed, when you've completed 4 sessions of this, you give yourself a 15 to 20 minute break. And then obviously factor in lunch times and evening times. But it's quite a good way to start the ball rolling when you are quite reluctant or maybe a little bit daunted by a task, because anyone can sit down for 25 minutes and do it. And often I find if I force myself to sit down, when the beeper kind of goes off and the 25 minutes are up, I can't believe that the time's up because I've really got into whatever I was doing. The third one, you've got so much reading to do. I mean, it's incredible the amount of reading that we always have to do. And you can always, you can often feel like this is never going to get done, you're never going to get the reading done. And to a certain extent, you never will. Like, you can't read absolutely everything. But just be careful about the allocation of your time. Don't spend so much time reading that you completely neglect writing. I don't have a written deadline for I don't have a deadline for any written work until 15 months from now. I could just not write until then, or until a couple of months before and then get it all down. But the problem with that is it then becomes a massive, massive chunk of work. If you can start writing now, even if it's just you read a key paper that's really, really relevant to your area, make a short summary, because that ultimately is going to help you when you do your literature review. And it's always really difficult to go back and think, right, I put a massive star on this paper because I knew it was important. Can't remember right now. And you don't have the time to read it again. You can, skim read it, but you don't have the time to spend reading papers 4 or 5 times just because you forgot what it was about. Work out what works for you. Are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? Are you a bit all over the place? It kind of depends. Do you have a job? When can you fit in your times? Do you really need your Saturdays off? If so, that's fine. Work out. I think this is what is a really great part of the master's dissertation project in itself, is you learn a lot about yourself. You learn about how you work. You learn about, you learn about what you're capable of doing. And be kind to yourself. It's a really difficult time. It's challenging and it's ultimately really, really gratifying because you come up with this incredible thing at the end of it that you should be really, really proud of. But that's no reason to kind of live through hell for 3 months while you're doing it. If you give yourself an evening off from now, from now and then, give yourself a treat, go out for dinner, go for a drink, do whatever makes you happy, watch Netflix for an hour in the evening, or, nobody watches Netflix for an hour. 5 hours if you have to. Do something that makes you feel good about yourself. Sometimes it can just be that tick box on I finished that section of my chapter today and I feel invincible. Sometimes it could just be, today was rubbish and I didn't get anything done. I feel like I'm a bit lost. I'm going for a burger right now, and that's how I'm going to sort myself out. I was going to have a final poll where I was going to ask you to suggest any techniques that you have, but I feel we are running slightly out of time. So rather than asking for your suggestions via the poll, I will invite you now, open up the room to ask any questions that you may have. And if you don't have a question, but you perhaps have something you'd like to contribute to what helps you stay motivated and organise your time, please do. Just as a final word, don't be afraid to seek help when you need it. It really is. I've just said this, but it's a challenging time and it's difficult. It really is. There's help out there. Approach people on your course if you feel like you can. Approach your supervisor. Email me if you really want to. I'm completely happy to speak to anyone about any doubts that they may have. But don't feel like you are battling this alone, because you're not. And when you have those days when you think, this is just going so badly, you'll get through it. You really, really will. I've got through it twice. I'm hoping to get through it a 3rd time. If I can, you will. There's no recipe for completing a dissertation. But I think talking about it, being in rooms with people who perhaps may have helpful advice, can always be a good way to at least get the confidence that you need to start it. Work out what works for you and try and enjoy it to a certain extent. You know, you will look back on this fondly one day. So I'll open the room up for any questions that you might have via Slido or just the old school raising your hand. And I wish you all the very best of luck with your dissertations and your future plans. And thank you for coming today.